They called her the Ice Queen. Lisa Michi wasn't just a mafia boss. She was a verdict delivered in designer heels and dead silence. And she never walked into a room alone. At her side prowled the Trinity, 3 90-pound pit bulls named Brutus, Phantom, and Reaper. In the underworld, they whispered the dogs weren't pets. They were living ammunition. Staff held their breath when those chains clinked against marble floors. Rivals chose prison over facing those jaws. Nobody got within arm's reach of Lisa Michi without understanding they were already bleeding. Until one night, a quiet, desperate waitress named Clara Lewis did the impossible. She didn't freeze. She didn't flee. She dropped to her knees in the middle of chaos, glass still shattering across polished floors, and made a single gesture that stopped 3 lethal animals mid-lunge and rewrote the power structure of Lisa Michi's empire forever. This is the story of how a waitress calmed the beasts no one could control and challenged the woman who ruled through fear alone. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm responding to everyone. Click subscribe, like this video. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want me to miss them. Now let's begin. The Velvet Rose didn't advertise. It didn't need to. If you had to ask where it was, you couldn't afford to walk through its doors. And if you walked through its doors uninvited, you didn't walk back out. Lisa Michi owned it the way she owned everything else in the city. Quietly, completely, and with a signature so invisible it might as well have been written in blood that only certain people could see. The restaurant gleamed like a jewel box. Vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes, tables spaced far enough apart that secrets stayed secret, white tablecloths, black suits, money that never touched hands, only accounts. But the real power in the room didn't sit at the tables. It prowled beneath them. Brutus, Phantom, and Reaper moved through the Velvet Rose like shadows with teeth. Massive, black-coated pit bulls with eyes that tracked movement the way predators tracked prey. Their chains were custom-made, chrome links thick as a man's thumb, attached to a leather lead that never left Lisa's hand. She didn't hold them to control them. She held them because the illusion of control was part of the performance. Everyone knew the truth. Those dogs didn't need chains. They needed permission. And Lisa Michi gave permission with a glance. The staff had been briefed on their first day. Don't make eye contact. Don't move suddenly. Don't drop anything. Don't breathe wrong. The Trinity wasn't there for decoration. They were there to remind every soul in that restaurant exactly who held the power and how quickly it could be unleashed. Lisa herself was a study in contrasts. Tailored suits that cost what most people earned in 6 months. Hair pulled back so tight it could have been carved from marble. Bone structure sharp enough to cut, and a mouth that almost never smiled. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to threaten. People looked at Lisa Michi and saw winter. Beautiful, merciless, and absolutely unforgiving. She moved through her restaurant like a queen inspecting her kingdom, the dogs flanking her in perfect formation. Phantom on the left, Brutus on the right, Reaper slightly behind, always watching, always ready. When she passed a table, conversations died. When she paused near the bar, even the ice in the glasses seemed to stop clinking. No one challenged her. No one questioned her. No one dared. Because in Lisa Michi's world, fear wasn't a weapon. It was currency. And the Trinity? They were the mint. Tonight, the restaurant hummed with its usual deadly elegance. Soft jazz, expensive wine, dangerous men pretending to be civilized. And somewhere in the background, barely visible in her black uniform and white apron, a waitress named Clara Lewis carried a tray of champagne flutes toward table 7. She'd worked here for 3 months. She'd survived by being invisible. That was about to change. Clara Lewis had perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. It wasn't magic. It was survival. Keep your chin down, your voice soft, your movements smooth and predictable. Make yourself so unremarkable that eyes slid past you like water off glass. She'd learned it young, back when being noticed meant being hurt, and she'd never unlearned it. At the Velvet Rose, invisibility was her greatest asset. She knew which tables tipped and which ones threatened. She knew which conversations to forget the moment she walked away from them. She knew that the man in the corner booth moved money that would never see a tax form, and that the woman by the window had ordered 3 executions over creme brulee in the past year alone. Clara knew because she listened, because people talked freely around waitresses, the way they talked freely around furniture. And she never, ever repeated what she heard. That was the deal. Keep your head down, do your job, collect your paycheck, and pretend you were deaf, blind, and too stupid to connect the dots. The Velvet Rose paid better than any restaurant in the city, 3 times better, because silence had a price tag, and Lisa Michi paid it willingly. Clara needed the money. Desperately. Her mother's medical bills didn't care about morality, and the collection agencies didn't accept excuses. So she showed up on time, worked her shifts with mechanical precision, and went home to her shoebox apartment, where the heat barely worked and the neighbors screamed through the walls. She'd been a veterinary tech once. Before everything fell apart. Before her mother got sick, and the bills swallowed her future whole. She'd loved working with animals, loved the way they communicated without words, the way trust had to be earned in increments, the way fear could be soothed with patience and presence. But that life was gone now. Sold for survival. Now she carried overpriced steaks to underworld royalty, and pretended not to notice the bloodstains on their reputations. The other staff had warned her about the dogs on her first day. Don't look at them. Don't talk to them. If they come near you, freeze. Don't run. They'll chase. Don't scream. They'll attack. Just freeze and pray Lisa calls them off before they decide you're a threat. Clara had nodded, smiled politely, filed the information away. But she'd also watched the Trinity carefully over the past 3 months. Watched the way Brutus favored his left front leg when he walked. Watched the way Phantom's ears flattened when anyone moved too quickly. Watched the way Reaper stayed behind the others, protective, vigilant, shoulders tight with tension that never released. They weren't monsters. They were traumatized. And trauma, Clara understood. She balanced the tray of champagne flutes against her hip, navigating between tables with practiced efficiency. Table 7. 4 men in suits that cost more than her rent, predators pretending to be businessmen. She was 3 steps away when someone's elbow caught the edge of her tray. Time slowed, the glasses tipped, and Clara's carefully constructed invisibility shattered, along with the crystal hitting the floor. The sound was catastrophic. 6 champagne flutes exploding against marble tile in a restaurant where silence was religion. Crystal shrapnel skittering across the floor in 1,000 glittering directions. Expensive liquid spreading like a crime scene. Every head turned, and the Trinity erupted. Chains rattled like thunder. 3 massive bodies surged forward in perfect unison. Muscles coiled, eyes locked, lips peeling back from teeth that could crush bone. Brutus hit the end of his lead first, the chrome links screaming taut. Phantom was half a second behind, low growl building in his chest like distant artillery. Reaper came last but fastest, the whites of his eyes visible, prey drive fully activated. Lisa's hand jerked on the leads. Down. They didn't hear her. The restaurant dissolved into chaos. Chairs scraped. Someone screamed. A woman in diamonds stumbled backward into a waiter, sending another tray crashing. Men who negotiated death for a living suddenly remembered they were mortal. Everyone ran, except Clara. Her body didn't consult her brain. It moved on instinct, muscle memory from another life, from hours spent in shelters and clinics, from the part of her that still understood frightened animals better than she understood people. She dropped. Knees hit marble hard enough to bruise. The pain didn't register. Her hands came up. Not defensively, not in surrender, but in something older, something that transcended language. One palm out, flat, steady. The other hand moved to her chest in a slow, deliberate gesture. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but it cut through the chaos like a scalpel. Easy. Brutus hit his lead again, momentum carrying him forward another 6 inches. His eyes found hers, wild, wired, ready to destroy. Clara didn't blink. She held his gaze, held her ground, held her hand exactly where it was, extended, open, offering nothing but calm in a room drowning in fear. Easy, she repeated. Softer this time. Not a command, an invitation. Phantom's growl stuttered, faltered. Clara's hand lowered slightly, angled downward now. The universal signal. Stand down. You're safe. I'm not a threat. Reaper's haunches dropped an inch. Then 2. The restaurant had gone silent. No one breathed. No one moved. Even the jazz had stopped playing, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Lisa's knuckles were white on the leads. Her mouth opened. Whether to command or to question, Clara would never know. Because Brutus sat. One moment he was a weapon primed to fire. The next, his massive frame folded, hindquarters meeting floor. Eyes still locked on Clara, but the violence draining out of them like water through a broken dam. Phantom followed. Then Reaper. 3 killing machines, frozen mid-strike by a waitress on her knees. Clara's hand was still extended, still steady, even though her heart was trying to break through her ribs. She didn't move, didn't celebrate, just held the moment, held the connection, like it was made of spun glass. Across the shattered champagne and broken crystal, Lisa Mitchie stared at her invisible waitress, and saw her for the first time. The office was on the 3rd floor, a place most staff only heard about in whispered warnings. Clara had never been summoned before. No one got summoned unless they were being promoted or eliminated, and the Velvet Rose didn't do much promoting. She climbed the stairs with legs that felt like water, each step a negotiation with gravity. 2 men in black suits flanked the door. Neither spoke. One of them opened it. Lisa sat behind a desk made of wood so dark it looked like solidified night. The Trinity lay at her feet, Brutus on the left, Phantom on the right, Reaper directly in front. They watched Clara enter with eyes that tracked her like surveillance cameras. "Close the door," Clara obeyed. The click of the latch sounded like a cell locking. Lisa didn't invite her to sit, just studied her with the intensity of someone examining a weapon they hadn't known they owned. The silence stretched until it became its own form of pressure. "What's your name?" "Clara Lewis." "How long have you worked here?" 3 months. "And in those 3 months, you never mentioned you could handle dogs." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. No one asked. Lisa's expression didn't change. "I don't like surprises, Clara. In my world, surprises get people killed. So when a waitress I've never noticed suddenly controls 3 animals that half my lieutenants are afraid to breathe near, I have questions." Clara's throat was dry. "I used to be a vet tech." "Before," she stopped. Lisa Mitchie didn't need her life story. "Before what?" "Before I needed better pay." Something flickered across Lisa's face. Not sympathy. She clearly didn't traffic in that currency. But perhaps recognition. The acknowledgement that survival made people do uncomfortable things. "Here's what's going to happen." Lisa stood, moving around the desk with the deliberate grace of someone who'd never been rushed in her life. "You're going to stop being a waitress. Effective immediately, you work for me. Your job is the Trinity. You feed them, exercise them, train them, keep them calm. I don't. You don't have a choice." Lisa's voice was silk wrapped around steel. "What happened downstairs? That doesn't just disappear. Word travels fast in my world. People saw weakness. They saw my dogs respond to someone else. Do you understand what that means?" Clara understood perfectly. In a kingdom built on fear, any crack in the foundation was an invitation for collapse. "You're a liability now," Lisa continued. "Either you're my liability, inside, controlled, useful, or you're everyone else's opportunity. And I don't leave opportunities on the table." The Trinity watched the exchange like spectators at a tennis match. Brutus's tail thumped once against the floor, a sound so incongruous in the heavy atmosphere, it might as well have been a gunshot. Lisa noticed. Her jaw tightened. "You start tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't be late." She returned to her desk, a clear dismissal. "Oh, and Clara, you live here now, 3rd floor, East Wing. Your things will be collected." Clara's stomach dropped. "I have a mother. Who needs medical care you can barely afford?" "I know. She'll be moved to a private facility. Best doctors in the city. Fully covered." It wasn't kindness. It was a leash. Just a different kind than the Trinity wore. The kennel was nothing like Clara expected. She'd imagined concrete and chains, some basement dungeon befitting animals weaponized for violence. Instead, she found a converted greenhouse on the building's roof. Glass walls, temperature-controlled, custom orthopedic beds that probably cost more than her former apartment's annual rent. Toys scattered across pristine flooring. Water bowls made of polished steel. A gilded cage was still a cage. The Trinity watched her from 3 separate corners. Territorial. Uncertain. The morning sun cut through the glass in sharp angles, illuminating the scars hidden beneath their glossy coats. Clara moved slowly, settling cross-legged on the floor near the center of the space. Not approaching, not demanding, just existing in their territory with her body language screaming non-threat. "I see you," she said quietly. Reaper's ear twitched. Phantom shifted his weight. Brutus remained statue still, but his eyes tracked her with surgical precision. She'd spent the night reading everything she could find about pitbulls, about trauma responses, about dogs trained for protection versus dogs trained for violence. The Trinity existed somewhere in between, not quite pets, not quite weapons, stuck in the worst kind of limbo. "You weren't born mean," Clara continued, voice barely above a whisper. "Someone made you that way, taught you that survival meant teeth, that trust was weakness, that the only safety came from being more dangerous than everything else in the room." Brutus's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Clara had seen it before, in shelter dogs with bite histories, in bait animals rescued from fighting rings, in creatures so thoroughly broken that violence became their first language. The Trinity wore it in every line of their bodies. The hypervigilance, the tension that never released, the way they watched doorways like ambush points. She recognized it because she wore it too. Her childhood had taught her the same lessons. Be smaller, be quieter.
Don't let them see you flinch, because flinching proves your prey. She'd survived by disappearing, But these dogs had survived by becoming too terrifying to touch. Different strategies, same trauma. I know what it's like, she said. Being scared all the time, never feeling safe. Having to be ready for everything to go wrong, because it usually does. Phantom took a step closer. Just one. Testing. Clara stayed perfectly still, hand resting palm up on her knee. An offering without expectation. But you're tired, aren't you? Tired of being afraid. Tired of being the thing everyone else is afraid of. It's exhausting, being a weapon. Because weapons don't get loved. They get used. Reaper whined. A sound so small and broken, it didn't match his size at all. Clara's chest tightened. There it was. Beneath the scars and the training and the reputation, 3 dogs who'd forgotten what gentleness felt like. Who'd been taught that closeness meant pain. That hands were for hitting, not for comfort. Brutus moved first. A slow, deliberate approach, head lowered, eyes locked on hers. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to reach, far enough to run. Clara didn't reach. Just waited, his nose extended, sniffing, processing, deciding. Then his massive head pressed into her palm. And something in the room exhaled. 3 weeks changed everything. The Trinity stopped sleeping in separate corners. Now they piled together near Clara's chair, a mountain of muscle and warmth that rose and fell with synchronized breathing. Brutus let her examine his injured leg without growling. Phantom played, actually played, chasing a rubber ball with the clumsy joy of a creature remembering childhood. Reaper followed her everywhere, a silent shadow who'd appointed himself her personal guardian. They were still dangerous, still powerful, but the hair-trigger violence had been replaced with something Lisa couldn't quite name. Trust, maybe. Or hope. She watched from the doorway more often than she'd admit. Watched Clara work with the dogs using patience instead of dominance. Boundaries instead of punishment. Watched 3 animals she'd spent years controlling through fear slowly transform into something she'd never imagined they could be. Pets. The word felt foreign, uncomfortable. Lisa Mishi didn't do pets. She did assets. Leverage. Tools that serve specific purposes in a world where sentimentality got you killed.
But then Phantom would rest his head in Clara's lap, eyes half closed in something dangerously close to contentment, and Lisa would feel something crack in the architecture of her carefully constructed emotional distance. You're staring. Lisa blinked. Clara stood near the water bowls, towel slung over her shoulder, looking directly at her with an expression that wasn't quite bold but wasn't quite deferential either. I'm observing, Lisa corrected, making sure my investment is paying off. Your investment. Clara's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Is that what they are? That's what everything is. Clara turned back to the dogs, running her hand along Brutus's spine. He leaned into the touch, shameless. Must be exhausting. Calculating the return on every relationship. Measuring everything by what it costs versus what it gives you. Lisa's jaw tightened. It keeps me alive. Does it? Clara glanced back. Or does it just keep you alone? No one talked to Lisa like that. No one questioned her methods, her philosophy, her carefully calibrated approach to existence. People who did tended to disappear, not always literally, but always permanently from her inner circle. But Clara wasn't flinching, wasn't apologizing, just stood there with dog hair on her clothes and challenge in her eyes, like she'd forgotten who she was talking to. Or maybe she simply didn't care. They were like you know, Clara said quietly. The dogs, when I started, so focused on survival, they'd forgotten how to live. So afraid of being vulnerable, they'd turned themselves into weapons. She paused. But they're learning. That safety doesn't have to mean isolation. That trust doesn't equal weakness. Lisa felt something dangerous rising in her chest, something that felt uncomfortably like longing. I didn't hire you to psychoanalyze me. No, you hired me because I did something you couldn't. Clara's voice was gentle, but uncompromising. I showed them it was safe to stand down. Reaper padded over to Lisa, tail wagging, an occurrence so unprecedented she actually stepped back. He sat at her feet, looking up with eyes that held none of their usual wariness. Waiting. Clara smiled. He wants you to pet him. I don't. I know. You don't do that. Clara moved toward the door, giving them space. But maybe you could try. Lisa stood frozen as Clara left, alone with 3 dogs who suddenly seemed less like weapons and more like creatures who'd been waiting years for permission to be something else. Slowly, so slowly it felt like surrender, she lowered her hand to Reaper's head. His tail wagged harder, and the Ice Queen felt herself begin to thaw. The photographs arrived in an unmarked envelope slid under Lisa's office door at 3 a.m. Clara, in the rooftop greenhouse, laughing as Phantom rolled onto his back for belly rubs. Clara, hand feeding Brutus treats while Reaper leaned against her legs. Clara, asleep in a chair with all 3 dogs piled around her like she was the center of their universe. No note, no demands, just images documenting the shift in power that everyone had noticed but no one had dared acknowledge. Until now. Lisa spread them across her desk as dawn bled through the windows. Her jaw ached from clenching. Someone had been on her roof. In her building, close enough to her most valuable assets, both the dogs and the woman who controlled them, to document their vulnerability. The message was clear. We can reach them. Anytime we want. Marco, she said into her phone. Her head of security answered on the first ring. Find the leak. I want to know who took these, who sent them, and who they're working for. And I want it yesterday. But she already knew. The photographs had Dmitry Kozlov's fingerprints all over them, metaphorically, at least. He'd been circling for months, testing boundaries, looking for cracks in the Michi empire. He ran the docks, controlled half the smuggling operations on the eastern seaboard, and had made no secret of his ambition to expand into her territory. The Trinity had always been her insurance policy, the visible threat that kept predators at bay. But now they were a liability, because everyone had seen what happened in the restaurant. Word had spread through the underworld like wildfire. Lisa Michi's dogs answered to a waitress. The weapon she'd wielded for years had switched allegiance, and in their world, weakness was blood in the water. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Beautiful animals. Shame if something happened to them, or to their new handler. Lisa's hand tightened around the device hard enough that the screen cracked. They weren't just threatening the dogs. They were threatening Clara. The realization hit harder than it should have. Clara was an employee, a useful tool. Someone who served a purpose in maintaining order and control. That's all she was supposed to be, except Lisa had watched her coax laughter from animals who'd forgotten joy existed. Had seen her fall asleep in that chair because she refused to leave them alone at night. Had caught herself standing in doorways just to observe the way Clara moved through the world. Without armor, without calculation, with a kind of gentle strength Lisa had forgotten was possible. Clara had become something more dangerous than a liability. She'd become someone Lisa couldn't afford to lose. Another text arrived. Let's talk. Tomorrow. The warehouse on 5th, come alone, or the handler pays for your pride. Lisa stared at the words until they blurred. Then she picked up her phone and made a call she'd sworn she'd never make. I need backup, she said quietly. And I need them armed, because Dmitry Kozlov had made a critical miscalculation. He'd threatened the one thing Lisa Michi had accidentally learned to care about. And that made him a dead man walking. Lisa left before dawn without saying goodbye. Clara knew something was wrong the moment she woke to find the greenhouse door locked from the outside. Not secured, locked. With her and the Trinity trapped inside, like pieces on a chessboard removed from play. She tried her phone. No signal. The glass walls that had seemed so beautiful now felt like an aquarium. And she was the exhibit. The dog sensed it immediately. Brutus paced. Phantom's ear swiveled, tracking sounds she couldn't hear. Reaper pressed against her leg, trembling, not with fear, but with the anticipation of violence. It's okay, she whispered, hand on his head. A lie. Nothing about this was okay. The explosion came at 6:47 a.m. Not close. Somewhere below, deep in the building's foundation. The greenhouse shuddered. Glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern across the eastern wall. Alarms shrieked. Emergency lights strobed red across the space. Then she heard the footsteps. Multiple sets, heavy boots on stairs. Men's voices shouting coordinates in Russian. The Trinity erupted into defense mode. Hackles raised, teeth bared, bodies positioned between Clara and the door. Every ounce of their training snapped back into place like muscle memory. Clara's heart hammered. She grabbed Phantom's collar, then Brutus's, pulling them back. No, not like this. We're not doing this. The door exploded inward, not unlocked. Blown open with a breaching charge that sent metal fragments screaming across the floor. 3 men in tactical gear poured through, weapons raised, not pointed at her, pointed at the dogs. Tranquilizers, one barked in accented English. Boss wants them alive. The handler, too. Clara understood in a crystalline moment of horror. This wasn't about killing Lisa. This was about taking her weapons, her status symbols. The Trinity would be repurposed, retrained to serve someone else. And Clara? She was just the off switch that came with them. Brutus lunged. The first man fired. The dart caught Brutus in the shoulder. He yelped, a sound of betrayal that shattered something in Clara's chest, and stumbled. But he didn't go down, kept moving forward with the kind of loyalty that transcended self-preservation. Stop. Clara threw herself between the dogs and the guns. Arms spread wide, body positioned as a shield. You want them? You go through me first. It was insane. Suicidal. She was 130 pounds of untrained civilian against armed mercenaries who killed for a living. But the Trinity was hers. They'd trusted her. They'd let her into their broken hearts and learn to hope again. And she would die before she let anyone turn them back into weapons. "Move," the lead man ordered. "No." He raised his weapon, pointed it directly at her chest. "Last chance." Clara's hands were shaking, but her voice came out steady. "Then shoot. But the second you do, these dogs won't stop. They won't listen to commands. They won't be useful to anyone. You'll have to kill them." She saw the calculation in his eyes. The cost-benefit analysis. 3 valuable assets versus 1 expendable handler. Phantom growled low, a sound that promised violence. Reaper's muscles coiled. Even Brutus, drugged and swaying, positioned himself beside Clara's leg. The man's finger moved to the trigger, and then the real explosion came. Not from below this time, from the stairwell behind them. Gunfire. Shouting. The distinctive crack, crack, crack of automatic weapons. Lisa's voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "North side, now!" The mercenary spun toward the new threat. Clara didn't think. Just moved, grabbed the nearest object, a heavy steel water bowl, and swung it into the closest man's knee. He went down hard. The dogs surged forward as one, and the greenhouse transformed into a war zone of teeth and fury, and 3 animals protecting the only person who'd ever shown them that violence wasn't the only language. When Lisa appeared in the doorway, covered in someone else's blood, she found Clara on the floor with the Trinity circled around her like a living fortress. Their eyes met, and Lisa understood with perfect clarity. She'd been wrong about everything. Clara wasn't her employee. She was her equal. The aftermath looked like a crime scene because it was one. 4 bodies removed in black bags. Blood scrubbed from marble floors. Bullet holes patched and painted over before sunrise. By noon, the Velvet Rose would open for business as if nothing had happened, because in Lisa Mitchie's world, showing weakness was deadlier than the attack itself. But something had fractured that wouldn't be fixed with plaster and paint. Clara sat in Lisa's office, still wearing clothes stained with blood and chemical residue from the breaching charge. The Trinity lay at her feet. Brutus still groggy from the tranquilizer. Phantom with a cut above his eye that Clara had already cleaned and bandaged. Reaper vigilant as ever. None of them would leave her side. Lisa stood at the window, back rigid, hands clasped behind her like she was restraining herself from something violent. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. "You locked me in," Clara said finally. Voice quiet, but sharp as glass. "You knew something was coming and you locked me in a cage. I was protecting you. You were controlling me." Clara stood, and the dogs rose with her. "There's a difference." Lisa turned. Her face was a mask, but cracks showed at the edges. Exhaustion, fear, something that might have been guilt if she allowed herself to feel such things. "I was trying to keep you out of it. Keep you safe. By making me helpless. By trapping me with no information, no choice, no way to defend myself." Clara's hands trembled. "That's not protection, Lisa. That's imprisonment. You don't understand how this world works." "I understand perfectly." Clara took a step forward. "You're so terrified of losing control that you suffocate everything around you. You turn people into assets, relationships into transactions, even affection into leverage." Her voice cracked. "You did it to the dogs. You were doing it to me." Lisa's jaw clenched. "I saved your life. You put my life in danger." The words exploded out of Clara with months of suppressed frustration. "You made me a target the second you dragged me into your world. You moved my mother without asking. You locked me in your building. You made decisions about my life like I was property you'd acquired. I gave you everything. You gave me a gilded cage." Clara's eyes blazed. "Better amenities than the Trinity's, sure, but still a cage. Still a life where someone else holds all the keys." The Trinity watched the exchange like spectators, heads swiveling between the 2 women. Reaper whined softly, a sound of distress at the conflict. Lisa's control cracked. "What was I supposed to do? Let you walk away? Let you become collateral damage because I couldn't?" She stopped. Swallowed. The next words came out barely above a whisper. "Because I couldn't protect what I—" She didn't finish. Couldn't. But Clara heard what wasn't said. The office fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the city below. Morning traffic, car horns. The ordinary world continuing while their extraordinary one hung in the balance. "You can't love something and control it," Clara said softly. "It doesn't work that way. Love requires trust, vulnerability, letting go of the outcome, and believing the other person will choose to stay. And if they don't, then they don't." Clara's voice was gentle now, sad. But at least it was their choice. At least it was real. Lisa looked at her, really looked, and saw everything she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. This woman who'd calmed her weapons with compassion. who'd shown her that strength didn't require cruelty, who'd made her feel things she'd spent decades learning not to feel. "I don't know how to do that," Lisa admitted. The words cost her everything. "I don't know how to not control things. It's the only way I've survived." Clara moved closer. Not touching, but near enough that the space between them hummed with possibility. "Then learn." The dogs did. The dogs didn't have a choice. Neither did I. Not really. Clara's hand hovered near Lisa's, an offering, not a demand. "But I'm choosing now. I'm choosing to stay. Not because you're paying me. Not because you've trapped me. But because somewhere in all this chaos, I started to care about 3 traumatized dogs and 1 traumatized woman who forgot she was allowed to be human." Lisa stared at Clara's hand like it was a weapon. "Or maybe a lifeline. If I do this, if I let go, you might lose," Clara finished. "Or you might finally have something real." The morning sun cut through the window, painting them both in gold. Lisa took Clara's hand, and for the first time in 20 years, chose trust over control. 6 months later, the Velvet Rose looked exactly the same. Same crystal chandeliers. Same white tablecloths. Same dangerous people making dangerous deals over $30 cocktails and food that cost more than moral flexibility. But everything had changed. The Trinity still walked through the restaurant. Brutus with his steady, protective gait, Phantom alert but no longer hypervigilant, Reaper confident instead of cautious. They still turned heads. Still commanded respect. But the fear had shifted into something else. Something closer to awe. Because now they walked beside Clara, not Lisa. And Clara moved through the space with a quiet authority that had nothing to do with violence, and everything to do with the kind of power that couldn't be taken, only earned. Lisa watched from the bar, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of her. Watching Clara stop at tables, greeting regulars. Her presence somehow making the restaurant feel less like a beautiful trap, and more like a place where even dangerous people could exhale. "She's good at this," Marco said, appearing beside Lisa with his usual ghost-like timing. "The clients like her. Trust her even." "I know. You were right to make her a partner." Lisa's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but closer than she used to get. "I didn't make her anything. She earned it." The documents had been signed 3 months ago. Clara Lewis, part owner of the Velvet Rose. Not a figurehead position. Real equity, real power, real say in how the business ran. Lisa's lawyers had warned against it. Her accountants had called it financial suicide. Her underboss had suggested she'd lost her mind. Lisa had signed anyway. Because Clara had been right. Control through fear was exhausting. And ultimately unsustainable. The attack had proved that. Showed her that no amount of weapons, guards, or vicious dogs could protect against the entropy of a world that rewarded paranoia with isolation. But trust, partnership, shared power. That was a foundation that didn't crumble the second you turned your back. Dmitry Kozlov's operation had collapsed within weeks of the failed kidnapping, not because Lisa had gone to war, though she'd been prepared to, but because word spread about what happened, how Clara had thrown herself between armed mercenaries and 3 dogs, how the Trinity had fought with the kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought or beaten into existence, how Lisa Michi had chosen to protect someone instead of sacrificing them for strategic advantage. In the underworld, reputation was currency. And apparently, loyalty, real loyalty, not the kind purchased with fear, was worth more than violence. People still feared Lisa. But now they also respected something else about her. The fact that she'd evolved, adapted, become something more dangerous than a crime boss who ruled through intimidation. She'd become someone with something worth protecting. Clara looked up from table 7, caught Lisa's eye across the restaurant, and smiled. Not the careful, calculated smile of an employee. The genuine warmth of someone who knew all your worst parts and chose you anyway. Lisa felt something in her chest that used to be ice crack a little further. The Trinity had been her first lesson. Watching them transform under Clara's patient care, from weapons into companions, from traumatized survivors into creatures capable of play and affection and trust. Brutus's limp had disappeared. Phantom had learned to relax. Reaper no longer startled at sudden movements. They'd healed because someone showed them safety without domination. And slowly, painfully, awkwardly, like learning a language after decades of silence, Lisa had learned the same lesson. She didn't control Clara, didn't monitor her movements, or dictate her choices, or treat her like an asset to be managed. Clara came and went as she pleased. Visited her mother, now thriving in a care facility Clara had chosen herself, had friends outside the organization, had a life that existed independent of Lisa's empire, and every single day, she chose to come back. That was the thing Lisa had never understood before. Choice made loyalty real. Coercion just made it temporary. Clara navigated through the tables toward the bar, the Trinity flowing around her like water. She slid onto the stool beside Lisa, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Table 12 wants to know if we can host a private event next month," Clara said. 70 guests. High security requirements. What did you tell them? That I'd discuss it with my partner and get back to them. Clara's eyes held a spark of amusement. You know, like business partners do. Lisa shook her head, but something warm bloomed in her chest. You're enjoying this. Immensely. Clara's hand found Lisa's under the bar, fingers interlacing with the casual intimacy of people who'd earned the right to touch without asking. Also, Phantom destroyed another cushion in the greenhouse. He's stress-chewing again. I'll order replacements. Or we could figure out what's stressing him. Lisa turned to look at her. You know what's stressing him. The same thing that's stressing all of us. The Castellano family is making noise about expansion. My supply lines are being tested. There's a new player from Chicago who thinks he can. Lisa. Clara squeezed her hand. Breathe. Lisa did. A conscious effort to release the tension that had been her constant companion for 2 decades. The need to anticipate every threat, calculate every angle, stay 3 moves ahead of disaster. We'll handle it, Clara said quietly. Together, like we handle everything else. Reaper's head rested on Lisa's knee, a gesture he'd started doing months ago when he sensed her stress levels rising. She dropped her free hand to his head, fingers scratching behind his ears. When did you become the calm one? Lisa asked. When I stopped running from things that scared me. Clara's voice was soft. When I realized courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and staying anyway. Across the restaurant, a tray clattered, someone's elbow catching a server's arm in an echo of that night 6 months ago. The sound cut through conversation like a gunshot. The Trinity's heads lifted. Alert, ready. But they didn't surge forward, didn't revert to violence. Brutus looked at Clara. Phantom's tail wagged once. Reaper stayed exactly where he was, head on Lisa's knee, trusting the humans to handle it. The server recovered, apologized. Life continued. And in that moment, Lisa understood what Clara had been trying to teach her all along. Power didn't come from being the most feared person in the room. It came from being the most trusted. From building something that people chose to protect because it protected them in return. From creating safety, instead of wielding fear. Clara's shoulder pressed against hers, solid, warm, present. The Trinity lay at their feet, healed, whole, finally at peace. The restaurant hummed with its usual dangerous elegance, but the undercurrent had shifted from threat to something almost like sanctuary. Thank you, Lisa said quietly. Clara turned to her, eyebrow raised. For what? For not running. That first night, when the glasses broke. You could have run. So could you, Clara pointed out. Every day since, you could have gone back to the way things were. Easier, more familiar. Not easier, Lisa corrected. Lonelier. Clara smiled, that genuine, unguarded expression that still had the power to stop Lisa's breath. Good thing neither of us are running anymore then. Lisa leaned forward, pressing a kiss to Clara's temple. A gesture she never would have allowed herself 6 months ago. Public affection was vulnerability. Vulnerability was weakness. But she'd learned that vulnerability, shared with the right person, was actually the strongest thing she'd ever built. The Trinity sighed in unison, a sound of contentment that resonated through the floor. And in the Velvet Rose, where fear had once been the currency that bought power, something quieter and infinitely more dangerous had taken its place. Love, trust, choice, the kind of power that didn't need chains or violence or terror to prove itself. The kind that simply was, and in being, changed everything. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.